Okay, adjustments to the agenda, there are none. So we'll move right on to good news and recognition. Lisa Demick is going to give us the Pownell Elementary School update.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Can you hear me? Is it on? Okay. Welcome to Pownell. I know you have a full agenda tonight, so I'll just highlight a few of the good things going on at PES. Thanks to our librarian, Patty Francis, and the parent-teacher group, the students were treated to a visit with Newbery author Cynthia Lord. My favorite part of this visit was getting to watch aspiring writers have lunch with her and talk craft. That was a lot of fun. Under the leadership of Allie Edwards, our music teacher, our 4th and 5th graders overcame a whole bunch of snow days to put on a wonderful musical, Gold Duster Bust. I always do that. Thanks to the leadership of some wonderful parent volunteers, and now that it's finally spring, the PES Garden Club is meeting regularly and making plans for some fun spring plantings. But I think what I'm most proud of right now is the professional resiliency of the PES staff. They've rallied to support a colleague with a terminal illness, have been flexible and creative about sharing space while the building's under construction, and successfully finished report cards, parents' conferences, and pulled off a worthwhile week of learning with adding an extra hour of instruction every day. So I guess that's my best good news, is I just feel so fortunate to work with such a dedicated, hardworking staff here at PES. So that's my update.
Thank you, Lisa. So next on our agenda is public comment, where I'm just going to provide a little bit of direction here on this. We have 2 public comments on our agenda, and we also have a workshop on proficiency. So typically how we work for our workshops is there will be an opportunity to discuss the items around the workshop at the end of the presentation from the administration. So what we would ask that is if you have a public comment around something other than proficiency and want to get up and share that now at the podium, please feel free. If your comments are related more to the proficiency and proficiency-based grading, we would ask that you wait until after we've all seen the presentations, because if you have questions, some of those might be answered, and then we can get that feedback at that point. So with that heading, we'll start if anyone has public comment on things other than proficiency to share. Okay. So, oh, yes.
So looking at the agenda, we have the workshop, and then B is consideration.
So the workshop includes just similar to our budget workshop did a few weeks ago. There'll be an opportunity, not technically written as public comment, because it'll give people the opportunity to ask questions that we can, or the administration can answer. So as part of that proficiency workshop will be an opportunity for community members to get up, provide their thoughts and questions.
Before we
discuss it as a board. Correct.
Thank you.
Yep. All right, so we'll jump right into the workshop then.
We had it going earlier.
Some technical support needed.
Okay.
Lisa, should we drop the lights so it's easier to see the screen, you think?
How's that? I think that's enough. Right? Okay, and the board can see it? Okay. Well, thank you all for coming out for the workshop. We're excited, the administration is excited to be presenting the board with a workshop format where we can have questions and answers and try to get clarity about what's going on with proficiency and RSU 5. So I really wanted to just talk about for a couple of minutes what is really proficiency-based education. We feel like it's founded on the best educational practices, and I think, of course, we're limited on time, but there are some key components that I just want to review with you. In a proficiency-based system, you're separating out the content knowledge from the habits of work, and when we think of habits of work, we think of things like determination or preparedness. We have clearly defined learning goals that are many times referred to as standards. We have success criteria, and that's really when you're using rubrics aligned to the standards. For a long time in education, there have been rubrics around, but in a proficiency-based learning system, it really is, the rubric is aligned to a specific standard. I'll show you an example of that a little later on. It includes specific feedback for students to move from one level to the next. And there's a real recognition that given different amounts of time, we feel that all kids can succeed in a proficiency-based system, and there are opportunities for reassessment. Just some brief key points in proficiency in RSU 5. You have been using, or we have been using, standards-based teaching and grading before the RSU even came together. We began standards-based grading using 1 to 4 at the 6 to 8 level in 2014. And for those first 2 years, you had a dual grading system. And then in 2016, we moved to just the 1 to 4 grading only. In 2015, we tried to roll out the 1 to 4 grading with the 9th graders, and at that time it was determined that the teachers at the high school needed more time to fully prepare, and so it was decided that you would delay it for 2 years and would roll it out in September of this year. I just kind of wanted to talk about why do we grade, right? We feel like no matter whether you're using a 0 to 100 system or a 1 to 4 or letters, that it's important to kind of reflect on that. The one reason that we grade is to communicate effectively about learning progress and achievement, that we feel like grading should always be timely, specific, and actionable feedback to the student, that it should provide teachers with information for future instructional planning. It needs to allow students the opportunity to demonstrate for what they know and can do, and it should always be something, the grade should always be defensible and credible, no matter what system you're using. So the board asked me, can you give just a few key points about what's the benefit of grading 1 to 4 and why are we doing that in RSU 5? Well, we believe that the scoring criteria or the rubrics really gives the students targeted feedback on specific standards instead of just focusing on the number or score. It should clearly identify the level of understanding and the skills mastered. A 1 to 4 grading system articulates where the student is in relationship to proficiency or being proficient. So there's usually exceeds, meets, partially meets, does not meet. In RSU 5, we've determined that we like doing it in the 0.5 increments, giving scores like 2.5, 3.5, so that that can provide a consistent target and it allows for more differentiation. And we feel that when scoring with a 1 to 4 rubric, that the scoring is more defensible and credible. And what do I really mean by credibility? I feel that and many feel that use a 1 to 4 system, when scoring with the rubric in 1 to 4, it's much more likely that you'll arrive at the same score if multiple people are scoring it. When using 0 to 100, because there's so many classifications, there's a potential for 100, it's more likely for scores to arrive at what we call misclassifications in grading assessments. So it's statistically more likely for a student to be misclassified as performing at the 85% level, when his true achievement might be at the 90%, than when then the potential of him being misclassified as scoring proficient when he's really distinguished. The large number of grade categories in the percentage grading scale allow for the greater influence of subjectivity, more error, and diminished reliability. Guskey is a researcher that has kind of written extensively about grading. So I just want to provide you a sample of a rubric that's currently been used in our high school, and this is where the teacher is trying to teach the students to read closely to determine what the text says or implies and to make logical inferences. And so students might be writing on a particular book, and when this student's paper was scored, the teacher was able to highlight that the student was able to cite textual evidence to support a mostly accurate analysis and was very convincing in his arguments. And because there are things highlighted in multiple categories, this student ended up with, in 2 categories, with a 3.5. And I could tell you when I taught 4th grade several years ago that my students got very good at being able to score if we put a sample up on the, at that time, overhead, that they were able to say whether the paper was a 1, 2, 3, or 4. That even as 4th graders, they became very accurate scores. We have tried hard to keep the board and the community updated about proficiency through the years. So this is a snapshot of starting back in 2013, board presentations and workshops that have been done around proficiency. This year we have tried to gather a lot of different feedback on proficiency from the teaching staff, the parents and the community, and also from students at the 6 to 12 level. And so what you're going to hear now is kind of what we've heard from the community and the teachers and the students. So the board had requested, could you tell us what other high schools are using? So Jen Gulko, the principal at the high school, she is going to speak to that.
Good evening, everybody. So one of the things that I did was conducted a little bit of research to find out what other area schools were using, and I reached out to principals of a variety of different schools that are nearby Freeport High School in order to find out what they were using for scoring and reporting. And as you can see, there's a variety of systems that are being used right now in schools that are nearby us. There are some schools that are only reporting out from a 0 to 100% scale, such as Yarmouth and Cape Elizabeth. There's some schools that are using a hybrid of the 2 systems, meaning that they have 1 to 4 scoring, which is then converted into a 0 to 100 score, such as Falmouth and Greeley. And then there are some schools that are purely scoring on a 1 to 4 basis and not doing any converting, such as Casco Bay, Poland, and Lake Region. One thing that you'll notice in the column that says explanation is that a commonality between all of these schools, that in some way, shape, or form, they are all working to incorporate some proficiency-based practices. So you'll see that even some of the schools, such as Yarmouth and Cape Elizabeth, who are reporting out 0 to 100, they are reporting separately for habits of work. So there's a variety of different methods that are being used, and some schools, such as Falmouth, have shared that they are planning in the upcoming years to be shifting even more. Falmouth's principal shared that they are planning to move to a 1-to-4 system in the school year 2019-2020. And Ray's going to share about nearby middle schools.
So much like Jen, I reached out to my colleagues in Cumberland County and around here to find out what they were using for grading systems and scales. And the only school that is doing a true 1 to 100 with no standards visible to students and parents is Brunswick Junior High. Harrison Middle School in Yarmouth and Greeley are doing a 1 to 100 scale that does translate back into it exceeds, meets, truly a 1 to 4 system. They both at the 5 to 6 grade levels have a 1 through 4 system. The Falmouth is on a 1 through 4 system currently in 6th and 7th grade, plans on extending that to 8th grade next year, and then as Jen just told you, the following year into the 9th grade. And then you can see all of the rest of the area schools are on a true 1 to 4 system. The only one that's not on this list that I did hear back since the putting this together was Cape Elizabeth, who plans on moving next year to start transitioning into a 1 to 4 system for the first time at the middle school, which lines up to what Jen says later down the road for the high school. So that's the area middle schools and what they're doing. The next couple slides are the teacher perspective at the middle school. And there's a whole bunch of data on here, and I'll kind of hit the highlights on each one. I think one of the keys is that there's 32 staff at our 2 schools, and 30 of them have responded, so we got a large teacher turnout with that. If you, one of the questions here on this page is, are teachers happy with the grading practice and curriculum changes we've made? And 95% of the staff here has said they like the direction we're going in. The other question is, do the standards and assessments that we're using now give the highest ability students more opportunities or less opportunities in the 1 to 100 scale? 72% of the teachers said more, 25% said the same, and 3% said less. Then the remaining questions, and that's I talk about the percentage of parents that have reached out to them with concerns about either the grading system, how you get to a certain level, or any concerns like that. And those are all in the less than 3%, less than 4%, less than 1%. So there's been very little parent complaints or questions even about it. The next one is, do students clearly do students appear to clearly understand there's a possibility for a 3.5 and 4? 93% of the teachers said yes. Do you have students in your class getting 3.5s and 4? 97% of the teachers said yes. And then on the last one, the question was, do you like and feel comfortable grading on a 1 to 4 point scale? 80% of the teachers, or 77% of the teachers said they like and feel more comfortable that way. 20% said they feel about the same, and 3% like the 1 to 100 better. Kim Copperthwaite, who's here, is a 7th grade language arts teacher, is going to speak a little bit about what it's like to be a teacher in a 1 through 4 and proficiency-based environment. Thank you.
Hi, good evening, everybody. As Ray said, I teach 7th grade students at Freeport Middle School in the content area of English language arts and social studies. I'm also a team leader for our 7th grade team of teachers and content leader for our English language arts teachers. I thought tonight I'd share my perspective in the practical application of standard-based grading at the middle school level. Standard-based grading has been an important base for designing my lessons around meaningful learning targets and then coaching students into the skills that they need to meet each of the targets. In English language arts, much of this is based on Columbia University's Readers and Writers Workshop through the Teachers College. So many of the bends, the learning bends, and the rubrics are created for us, and we work off of that from there for our individual assignments. When I create an assignment, it typically has multiple and discrete standards that I'm able to assess individually when I'm using standard-based, and the resulting grade that I get using the system gives a more accurate picture of an individual student. It's not uncommon in middle school, especially around writing, to see one student all over the place with multiple standards. They may have mastered voice in their writing. They may have mastered elaboration, and then for some reason I might see a decline in their ability to form paragraphs, sentence structure. And so being able to assign different and very specific standards to that helps guide me in understanding what their learning needs are. But one of the greatest advantages, I think, of using a 1 to 4 scale is that it better meets the needs of upper level students, and I'm able to stretch an assignment, make it more complex, and give students who are ready for a challenge just that increased depth, scope, or pace of their learning by having that option of a distinguished level. When I first came to Freeport 6 years ago, we were using letter grading systems at the middle school. I had come from a background of standard-based grading, and all of my teaching certification courses had prepared me, trained me for grading on standard-based. Also, my master's courses had emphasized standard-based, and the schools I had previously worked in had all used standard-based grading. So I have to say that it was sort of nice to come to Freeport and have a 1 to 100 scale, especially for my first year, getting used to a new environment. And in many ways, it was much easier. I would take an assignment, just divide it up with points or percentage, grade it, and call it a day. That didn't last long because we quickly moved into work to start designing our learning and our grading towards standards-based. We quickly started having discussions. We started working in teams and in content area, forming what we would have our students do, what it would look like, and how we would grade. We spent many, many hours on that in professional development workshops and after school time. Moving to standards-based has changed our professional conversations, I think. I've noticed that we have shifted our focus to be more specific on how we define the quality of student learning. We often talk about what does a 3 look like and spend some time developing exemplars around that. We often talk about what do we have to do to lift the level of the learning to get that to a 4, and how do we communicate that best to a student. We also talk about 2, students who are reaching 2. What exactly do we need to look at to support them so they can reach the proficiency level of a 3? We share rubrics that work well in our classroom, rubrics that are communicating very clearly to students and that students give us feedback on that they understand. Rubrics that break down the complexity of the tasks that we're now asking students to do. I am concerned when I hear about a movement possibly back to either letter grading or percentage grading. To me, it feels like a movement backward after we have done so much work on a more holistic and comprehensive system. Standards-based grading has challenged me to be more precise and more deliberate in my lesson planning. And it has definitely challenged me and continues to challenge me to be extremely clear when communicating to students as to how they're going to improve and how are they going to take their learning to the next level once they've mastered something that may even be a little bit above what I'm asking them to do. So I am hoping as a district that we can continue moving forward with the standards-based grading system. Thank you.
So at the high school, we also felt that it was important to get feedback from our teachers. We know that over the course of the past 4 years, our teachers have been working incredibly hard, individually, collaboratively, as departments, to develop our proficiency-based practices. And we wanted to capture what they think is working well and where they are seeing some of the struggles. We held in-person feedback meetings with our faculty members, and then we also sent out a faculty survey. We only had 25 of our faculty members respond to that. And so the percentages in the numbers represent those respondents. We really tried to seek feedback in 4 specific areas related to proficiency, although there are more elements to the proficiency-based system. We focused on scoring criteria, habits of work, the reassessment policy, and reporting or scoring in a 1 to 4 system. And one of the things that you'll see from the survey data, and along with Ray, I won't go through every point on this, but just try to summarize this, is that you'll see that there are some areas where there is some division amongst our staff, whether they agree or disagree with some of the statements. For example, scoring criteria provide targeted feedback to our students. You can see that there's a clear divide about whether people agree or disagree with that. We did also choose deliberately to put the neutral option in there. Sometimes in a Likert scale, we would only choose 1 through 4 and have people forced to agree or disagree. We did think it was important to capture the neutral because we are only 8 months into our first year of implementation of proficiency-based practices. And so some of our staff, as you can see from the data, has not chosen yet whether they agree or disagree with some of the statements. There are other places where there's a clear voice from the 25 respondents that they think that there are some concerns about the system and places where revision is needed. So in terms, you'll see that for the scoring criteria as well. That 18 of the 25 respondents felt like scoring criteria in their department needed some type of revision. That could be major or that could be minor revision. In terms of habits of work, we had a higher percentage of the respondents agree or strongly agree that separating habits of work from academic scores is a benefit to our students. But you can see that there are some concerns from the 25 respondents about how we are using and implementing habits of work and the criteria that we're using. In terms of reassessment, again, you'll see it's kind of an interesting divide on whether people believe, or the respondents believe, that the reassessment policy that we have enables students to improve their learning. As we had 8 people agree, 9 who were neutral, and 7 who disagreed. One thing that we are fairly clear on from the second question is that we do need to figure out how to better encourage and motivate our students to seek those reassessment opportunities. And then in terms of 1 to 4 scoring, you can see that there was strong agreement of our teachers that they believe that there is an opportunity for a 4 on a summative in classes, as we had 20 out of 25 respondents agree with that. But then there is clearly some concern about whether the 1 to 4 grade scale accurately reports student learning and whether students are able to easily access that information through PowerSchool. So along with the survey data, I'd like to invite Margie Chalmers to share her perspective. Margie is one of our 9th grade teachers and also is one of our AP teachers from our ELA department.
Hi, good evening. I'm Margie Chalmers. Ms. Gulko asked me to share with you a little bit about my experience with PBE, and I think some of the things have been touched on a little bit already tonight, but so I'll try to add just the things that are offering some more anecdotes to what has been said, or maybe a little bit different from what's already been mentioned. So one of the first points is we spent in departments a lot of time, as was mentioned earlier, about with designing our curriculum and aligning it with the standards and indicators, and aligning these indicators with our classes. And I think that has been really beneficial. One of the examples that stands out to the most to me is actually with my English 12 class, which when I came to Freeport 4 years ago was a very small class designed for sort of less engaged students, and felt like an uphill battle a lot of the times. And since we have sort of redesigned the class, aligned it to standards, opened it up and made it more mainstream, that has raised the caliber of the class, but it's also I feel like I'm on the same side as my students in the class now, because I can say, here's the list of indicators that the department and the school has said you have to do in order to graduate, and my job is to help you do these things. And so I feel like I'm on the same team as them, and we are working together to go through and make sure that they can do each of these different skills. So I think in that regard, it has helped to lift some of the lower level classes and keep them at an even, level the playing field, and make sure that they're doing the same skills and learning experiences as the regular classes. Another benefit that I would say from the standards-based that has been talked a little bit about tonight is this alignment of each assessment is aligned to indicators, and the indicators are aligned to rubrics. And as was mentioned, those rubrics are providing a lot of feedback for the students, especially when it's a larger assignment, like an essay that might be doing a couple different indicators. And in any writing indicator, we're breaking it down to many different components on that writing piece. Projects, I think, where there's many moving pieces, and so to get feedback in each of the subcategories for the student is really beneficial for them. The other nice thing about the rubrics when they're aligned to standards is that the students are seeing the same ones over and over again. And so by now, it's April, and they are beginning to become familiar with what these rubrics mean, and they're sort of just beginning, I would say, my freshmen, to see some patterns, like, I'm always scoring low in organization. Yes, you are. We should get organized. And so, there's a lot of play with figuring out how to best use them, because they can also be cumbersome. It's a lot of data points, which can be overwhelming. Most recently, I just finished teaching the To Kill a Mockingbird unit, and we had our students finish that unit with an essay on prejudice, and I had them turn in their rough drafts, scored them on every component of the rubric, and gave them feedback, sent it back to them, and then made them resubmit them. And the idea, I'm in the middle of grading them, but the idea is that they're going to move up in each of those categories a little bit on the rubric. And if they aren't, we've got this the rough draft and the final draft version to look at and compare. So I think there are some real benefits with using these rubrics. But speaking of rubrics, one of the things that's challenging, it's interesting to hear all these different viewpoints on the 1 through 4 scale, because to me, switching from the traditional scale where I had so many points to give them, and as Dr. Foley mentioned, it's a little more subjective. I liked that subjectivity. Not all 3s are the same. I think there are a lot of students, so now I could, if they're in that 3 range, it's just a 3, whereas before it might have been between an 86 and a 90. And so a lot of students sort of stay in that same score for a while, but it's like a low 3, and then they're moving up and it's a little higher 3. So I saw that subjectivity as sort of a way to encourage them, like, you were at an 86, now you're at an 88, now you're at a 90. And it allowed me to be more precise, just the way before not all Bs were the same, not all 3s are the same. So I appreciated I felt like I could be more precise when the scale was more stratified than just the 7 points that the scoring rubric gives us. Another point about that hasn't come up tonight is one of the things that we're doing at the high school when we're scoring formatives and summatives. We have agreed as a school to have formatives count as 20% of the grade, and summatives count as 80% of the grade. And in some departments, it's not even 20% of the grade. And as an English teacher, it feels to me like that limit of formatives to 20% sort of de-emphasizes or devalues a little bit of the practice. And we spend a lot of time reading the text and struggling with the text or struggling with a paragraph and how to structure it. And I think the practice is really important. When I think back to that To Kill a Mockingbird unit that we just finished, we spent about 6 weeks reading the book and reading supplemental text and doing a lot of different reading strategies and reading skills and getting formative grades in that. And then we spent, and then we just did this big summative essay that I mentioned before. And when I look at the, essentially the quarter 3 grades, that 6 weeks worth of work is only 20% of their grade. And the essay at the end is 80% of their grade. And that doesn't feel like the right reflection of where we put our time and energy. I think they're both important, the product and the practice, but somehow I'm feeling constrained to this 80-20, and it doesn't seem like a true reflection of what the students are doing over time in my classroom. And under the traditional method, we had a little more control over that. If each homework assignment was 20 points or something at the end of the quarter, that might add up to 120 points, and then the essay was 100 points, and they would sort of even out. And that felt like a fairer distribution of their grades. So then, speaking of grades, the last thing I'm going to mention tonight is because it's April and the kids are picking their heads up, just like the little buds in our gardens, they are concerned about their grades. There are a lot of students who have 2s or 2.5s right now, and they want to know what they can do to bring their grade up. And when we try to go back and look through their assignments, first of all, that's very difficult to do in the grade book, but I've been told that's not what this meeting is about tonight. But when we go back and look through their assignments, the grade book is averaging their grade over the whole year. And with proficiency-based education, we want our students to be at a 3 or higher in the end of the year. And so if they were at a 1.5 and then a 2, and they work their way up to a 2.5 and a 3, they're not going to average out to a 3 at the end of the year. So I have students who have done a really nice job with our final, where we are right now. They've worked their way up to a 3, but their average is still below a 3. And that's a really hard problem to reconcile, because I don't want to just ignore everything we did the first half of the year, because that practice we did is important, and we know that. So those are just the kinds of discussions that we're having at the high school, and I think that's in part why people do feel a little frustrated with this new system, because we're not sure exactly how best to reconcile some of these dilemmas that we're faced with. Thank you.
You're coming. The wonderful Hank Ogilvy is going to present the CEA perspective.
I'm unplugging you, Becky. There you go.
That's good. That's great.
And while I'm always proud to be a CEA member, this is just teacher perspective. It has nothing to do with the association. And our understanding was, you folks, the board, wanted a teacher perspective that was just straight from the teachers. So my name is Hank Ogilvy. I've taught at the high school for 25 years. I've taught primarily 9th graders, so I do have some experience with this arena. I have been through educational reform, and I'm going to guess that I will be going through educational reform again in the future. We sent this survey out to all 3 schools. I screwed up and sent it to everybody at Durham, but Will fixed me, so that was good. Thank you, Will. And we asked people to fill it out, those teachers who primarily are using the 1 through 4 system, that this is what they're living in right now. So if you look at our little graph here, red is the high school. So most of the people who filled this out were high school folks. Some of those high school folks just taught 9th grade. You'll see the next part. You'll see the next part, I guarantee. Okay, sure. The next one is going to be really big. Okay, you see these glasses. This is just. I just wanted to give you a quick snapshot of who did the survey. And I have a loud voice, so I can get up here. That this is high school mixed classes, And that's pretty important to know because a lot of our educators at the high school, they have 9th graders mixed in with upper class kids, so they're living in a dual grading world. 10th, 11th, 12th graders might be using a 1 through 100 system, but they've got to pull out this 1 through 4 system for their 9th graders. So a lot of these are high school kids, high school teachers who have mixed classes, and then we have high school teachers who are just 9th grade teachers, and that would be me over there and a lot of my colleagues. Then we have Orange is Freeport Middle, and then we have Durham. So the bulk of the data is high school, and I'm only going to show you high school data, but I just wanted to let you know who responded to this survey. And now I will switch to the visually impaired slideshow. So, yay!
Excuse me.
And yes, ma'am.
Was that 42 respondents total?
48.
48 total.
48 total. And remember, we asked only, are you living in this world? Is this just you're living in the 1 through 4 world? So there's is there 50 teachers at the high school?
There's 35 who are living in.
Right, yeah, so they didn't, a lot of folks at the high school didn't respond to this, who don't live in that world. And then we asked several questions. A couple of the questions were suggested by board members. I think 3 of them were suggested by board members. And then we added a few of our own. So, one question, does the support and time that has been offered has effectively prepared me for implementation of the system? So that is getting ready for this. And you can see this is over here is totally disagree, totally agree, right? So you can see most people are sort of on the agree side. That is all 3 schools. That's the high school. So a lot of folks in the high school maybe did not agree that they were prepared to do this. That's me and a couple of colleagues. I was lucky in that I was in a PLC group that's been working on this for 3 years. So I've been sort of immersed in it. Some of the folks who are teaching mixed classes weren't as lucky as I was, and I think that's why we have some of that data to the left. That is the middle school. They felt that they were prepared. Again, the right is totally agree, the left not so much. And that is Durham Community School. A little bit more of a mixed bag. Second question, educational practice has, what happened there? Now my educational practice has improved as we have begun full implementation of the proficiency-based system. So do the teachers feel like they've improved their practice? That's the 3 schools. So total agree on the right, total disagree on the far left. That is the high school. That is Freeport Middle, and that is Durham Community School. So feeling like your practice as a professional has improved. Thank you very much behind me. It's like I'm willing it to happen, and it's happened. PBE, as we have implemented it, has led to an improved learning experience for students. So there's a question that's very similar, but this was teachers trying to capture what's going on in the classroom is a better situation. And that's overall the 3 schools, so 3 in the middle. It's basically balanced. That's the high school, feeling that maybe it hasn't led. And as with Ms. Gulko's survey, 3 is neither here nor there. And I think that's a lot of people are so in the middle of it. We're not done with year 1, so I think we're still in the process of drawing conclusions, but generally leaning towards disagree. And Durham Community School and Freeport Middle. That's because Ray gives them T-shirts and food. PBE, as we have implemented it, has led to an overall improvement in the quality of student work. So this isn't just the classroom environment, this is the work that we get back. This has been a great concern to a lot of the freshman teachers. We have discussions about this quite frequently, and our great concern is our students, if a student has a greater range or ability to succeed, is that being diminished by saying, just sort of reducing your grades to a 3, 3.5, or 4, and our kids simply saying, all I need is a 3. And so we've been concerned that the quality of the work hasn't been quite as good. That's overall in the 3 schools. And that's the high school. You can see that concern is evident. The people responded that they're not very confident that the student work has improved. And that is Durham and Freeport Middle. I know and understand my building's PBE plan. So that would be things, how do I score, habits of work, addressing students who aren't meeting standards, honor roll eligibility, all the components that go into a PBE system. Do folks feel that they're comfortable with their plan? That's all three schools. High school, so people feeling not so comfortable with certain elements, obviously. We didn't give them a choice as to which elements they were more or less comfortable with. And that is DCS, pretty comfortable with their plan, and Freeport Middle. Implementation of PBE in my school seems to vary by discipline or classroom. And this is, one of the things about performance-based is, oftentimes it's only as good as the standards or the indicators that you're using. So performance-based by itself, you could come up with a performance-based system that's horrible if you're using horrible standards or indicators. A lot of us at the high school are using the main learning results, which were developed back in the 1990s. And if you've seen the science standards, the number of science standards, or with social studies, we have a good number of standards as well. It's very different than what it is in English, where they have a fewer number of standards. So a lot of times what's happening in classrooms by discipline is very different based upon which standards you're using and just the volume of standards. So does it vary by discipline? So most people in these three schools agree that it does vary by discipline or classroom. High school, pretty profound that it varies by discipline or classroom. DCS doesn't feel so, nice and consistent over there. And Freeport Middle. And the 1 through 4 reporting system, as currently implemented, accurately communicates achievement to students and parents. So we're very concerned. We want our kids to know exactly where they stand. We certainly want parents to know exactly where their students stand. And that's all three schools. Again, disagree to the left, agree to the right. That's the high school. A lot of folks at the high school feel like this doesn't communicate quite enough to students or parents. Durham Community, and Freeport Middle. And then the last question was, does the 1 through 4, even with the 0.5 markups, 1, 5, 2, 2, 5, so on, does it provide enough flexibility to accurately assess student work as compared to something like a 1 through 100 system? Is it flexible enough? That's all three. And that is the high school, not feeling maybe it's flexible enough. Durham Community, and Freeport Middle. So that is just the raw data from that survey. I think that there's a lot of elements that go into it. One, it is year one, and it's very complex. And at the high school, it's, as I said, with different classes, with mixed classes, with the number of standards that some disciplines have. It's not necessarily a clear-cut answer for everybody there, because everybody's going through it in a different way. As I said, I was lucky enough to be preparing for this for 3 years. Some of the teachers who are teaching mixed classes didn't have that same benefit, so it's been a little bit of a challenge. Thank you very much. Oh yeah, sure. Yep, and I can share this with anybody on the board, this slideshow too.
So Sarah, you could be the thumbs up or thumbs down if you can't see it. You can't? Even? Okay. I'm sorry about that. Other way. Other way. Okay. Okay. Whoa.
I think we're still zoomed in, which is why it's still
Do what?
It's still zoomed in. We're gonna. Yep. So we can't see the top of the slide. Yeah, that's as much as we're gonna be able to get.
I think we're going to leave it there.
Yeah.
They're saying if it's further over, they think they can see it better.
If it's further that
That way.
Oh, this way. Okay.
Huh?
Hank, while they're figuring that out, the Durham teachers, was that just the Durham Middle School, or was it the elementaries 1 through 4?
Will's probably the best person to ask.
Well, but then are we going to cut out all these people? Yeah.
For middle schools,
Right,
okay. Okay.
Yeah, we didn't record who they were. I can keep zooming in because I think that's probably move that. All of the, and then I can just keep zooming in back and forth.
Okay. Will that move or not?
Yeah, we can. Yeah, I
Yeah,
can
just
zoom
blow it
in
up.
too.
Yeah, just blow it up. I think. Okay, sorry about that. So back in February, a satisfaction survey was sent out to all parents from the strategic planning subcommittee of the board. And there were a couple of questions on there about grading, so I'll try to just kind of summarize this. This was all of the district data compiled from all of the schools. And the question that was asked to parents, teachers help me understand how my child's work is evaluated. And I will say that we got 353 responses, which is about 9% of our parents max, because if you have more than one child and you filled out the survey 2 or 3 times depending on where your kids are at school, then that's in that 9%. So 63% of the parents responded that the teachers help me understand how my child's work is evaluated. And then the other question around grading or assessing was, when reporting about my child's progress, teachers use language I can understand, and that went up. 82% of the parents felt like when the teachers did engage in that conversation that they were very helpful in using language that they could understand. And now we are going to have Charlie Mellon, the assistant principal at the high school, just talk about the feedback from the parent perspective.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we had a couple parent meetings and sent out a survey to parents as well to get their perspective on and feedback on these proficiency-based practices. We definitely got some positive feedback, but we also got a lot of concerns. So I'll just kind of go through that. Between the surveys and the meetings that we had, we got about 13% of the freshman class parents kind of responding and giving us feedback. We got a positive feedback about separating habits of work from academic scores. Positive feedback about using clear standards and aligning those standards to scoring criteria. Also about parents were happy about the ability to reassess, giving students the ability to reassess, as well as raising the bar for all students. We got a lot of positive feedback on that. In terms of habits of work, though, while they like the idea that we're separating them, the execution there's some questions about the execution of how we are separating habits of work, particularly in terms of some of the domains we have, like scoring, like this domain determination is tough to measure. There are some concerns from parents about how do students attain a 4 on summative assessments. And the calibration of scoring practices amongst teachers. A lot of concerns, as we've heard, about using 1 to 4 scoring in general as opposed to 0 to 100. And along those lines, I mean, we've heard that their concerns come from things like, how do we sort students if we're not using 0 to 100? How do we differentiate students from one from another? And also, there's concerns about the 1 to 4 scoring and how it's going to affect college admissions. Transcripts, they're worried about what it looks like for transcripts, or college is going to have a tougher time determining where our students stand compared to students on a 0 to 100 scale. So along those lines, we were asked to kind of get some lists of where the colleges that students are going to are in the area. And so we went online and found some college acceptance lists from 3 Cumberland County schools, one of which is Freeport High School, and the other 2 are from Cumberland County schools that are scoring on a 1 to 4 scale. Does anybody want to guess which one's Freeport High School? Any board members want to take a guess? Which one's Freeport High School? Yeah, I mean, just you can try to guess if you'd like. What did you say? B. Anybody else? B? B? A couple B's. Freeport High School is School A. And then the other 2 schools, School B is Baxter Academy in Portland, and School C is Casco Bay High School, also in Portland. All right, next slide. I think this is Will. Oh, Ray. Sorry, Ray. Oh, it's Will.
Okay. All right. So some of the concerns we've heard at the K-8 level is concerns about not being a pathway consistent or always on the 4, and that came up when we were presenting our goals this fall. And I will say at the middle school level, when we heard that, the next professional day we had scheduled for that, we actually switched what we were going to be working on to work with each department on how to make sure that we are making it clear and consistent that there is always a 4 and it's achievable within that. And I think where we are currently with that has shown some great improvement as the year has gone along due to the feedback we got around that. I did get one concern about assessments not being sent home, so we did just talk to all of the teachers and said, if you have an assessment, send it home so the parents can see what it is. And I know that's a pretty solid K-5 expectation of teachers, and they do that. I remember getting them all my everyday math tests back from the teachers, so that was happening K-5 but not 6-8. Better access to grades and assignments is another one that we have heard. One of the improvements that we did make mid-year is the online report card that's available for kids, and then actually printing it out for the parents to see. That is coming up, a version of that is coming up later in the slide, so you can see how that is easy to read. And what we found is that kids are actually clicking into their report card now, because it updates in live time to see how they're doing in classes, because it's just clearer and easier to see. It's not always easy to understand the 1 to 4. It's something we heard from the parent perspective. So it's something we talked to the teachers about just to make sure it's clear. And when we look at the student data coming up, you'll see that the students are clearly understanding, what it is for 1 through 4. And then the better communication about proficiency-based and standards associated with the grading is something that we've worked with teachers just to make sure that they are communicating that clearly to the students, and in doing that. And when we look at the number of parents who have called in, the percentage on that, and the feedback from students, I think that the kids are clearly understanding what's going on. You'll see that in the student feedback. And then we also heard from some parents that they prefer a 0 to 100. Jen or Charlie?
Okay. We also got feedback from students, and this was fun, actually. We had a series of pizza lunches and with ice cream, and so we were able to get feedback from 73 freshmen, and we kind of asked them questions and just had a discussion about a lot of the same categories that you've heard about tonight: habits of work, scoring criteria, 1 to 4. And I think what's really interesting about this data is that it really mirrors a lot of the kind of findings that you hear about what parents said, what teachers said, either through the CEA data or the survey that Jen and I sent out as well. But so there's definitely seems to be some support for the idea of habits of work, but the way it's being implemented doesn't seem to be working. Students like that habits of work is connected to eligibility. They like that they could still feel successful in a class even if their academic scores aren't super great. They say it gives them a reason to try hard. However, they also think it's not fair that they're now getting graded twice. And they also worry about the rubrics not being clear, and that the domains are not fair. And again, like the domain of determination, how do you measure determination? They're wondering things like those. They have those types of questions. For scoring criteria, a lot of similar kind of trends here. Like they like the idea of it, but it's not being implemented as well as they would like, I think. So they like that they now know what to do for success, that there's clear reasons for the scores given, and it's easy to know where the mistakes are. However, sometimes on the rubrics, the wording is hard to understand, and it's not being implemented consistently in all the classes. And I think that kind of speaks to what Hank was talking a little bit about in terms of different departments having having to kind of use it differently, and we heard that kind of through parent feedback as well. And then we also asked the students about 1 to 4 scoring. And definitely some pros and cons here as well. Again, they like the specificity when it's being used with a scoring criteria rubric. They think it would be a better system if it started earlier and younger for them, and they use it for the entire high school career. And I think they wish that a 2.5 would be considered passing and not a 3. And then some cons. So as some people mentioned earlier tonight, we have at the high school some 9th graders teaching mixed classes. So some 9th grade teachers, some 9th graders are in classes with 10th through 12th graders. And when they get an assessment back, they see on their paper a 3 or something like that, where the other student gets a 85. And so they're comparing a lot with these other peers, as they would naturally. And so they feel like it's not fair. They feel like they need what equates to a quote 85 to pass, while they see their peers passing with a 70. And they think it's good to try to raise expectations, but it's hard if it's just the 9th graders whose expectations are being raised. And they don't think it's fair that they are having to work harder than the 10th through 12th graders to pass a class. Also, these 9th graders are also really worried about the effects on college admissions. They brought this up. They're worried about how they're going to stand out. Freeport High School kid is going to stand out if everyone has a 3, and other schools are reporting to colleges different transcripts. And they also think it's hard that in some disciplines it's harder to kind of grade on a 1 to 4. In math, you get a certain number of right and you get a certain number wrong, and that should be the score. So how do you kind of do that on a 1 to 4 system? And they're constantly wondering how it compares to 0 to 100, and that question is hard to answer, and we try to have them not compare that. It's like comparing apples to oranges kind of thing, but it's really hard for them not to compare. Of course they're going to try to compare. So that's the feedback from the students at the high school. And now some middle school student perspective.
So the middle school student surveys, we had 424 of the 496 students who are at the 2 middle schools respond, which is about 86% of our students. A couple of the highlighted stats on this page are, one of the questions was, do you understand what a 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5, and 4 means in terms of your grades and how you're doing in the class? 95% of the students said yes, they do understand that. Another question there talks about, do you see students in your classes getting 3.5s and 4s on assessments? 96% of the students said yes. And then 3 of the questions on this page and others talk about student motivation to get the best possible grade in habits of work and content area, and those numbers were 92% said yes, 94% said yes, 95% said yes on the different, with the lowest being 85% said they were motivated to get the highest possible grade on the habits of work. That was the lowest of the 3, but it was still at 85%. this one talks about, can you check PowerSchool? Can you use it? The kids were very clear they can use PowerSchool and check it. Then the one really interesting question here is, do you like having habits of work separate, or would you rather see the habits of work and content mixed into one grade for the class? And 73% of the middle school students said they would rather see it separate and not as one content grade. And now on to the class of 2017. Oh, my slide's different than next one.
For those who don't know, I'm Will Pidden. I'm the principal at Durham. And also, for those who don't know, this was a concern. This presentation may go a little long, so I was limited to a very small amount of time because I can definitely go a little long. And I just have a couple of slides to speak to. So one of the issues when we're looking at grades and the message they send, we want to make sure that they're valid and reliable, and to this end we'll often compare our classroom practices, our classroom assessments, to those with standardized assessments that we're also being compared to, and just to see how well they align. So by separating out the habits of work and focusing on content proficiency, we believe we can see more consistency and alignment between local and standardized assessments. And just a reminder that a 0 to 100 system, if you're not separating out habits of work, is no panacea also. I already know it's hard to see this, so I'm going to take the liberty of just reading a bit of it out. This was from the high school class of 2017. 60% of 11th graders had a grade of 85 to 100 in math as juniors. 40% of the 11th graders at or above the state standards in math on the SAT. So a disconnect between what they're getting in class and what they're perhaps getting on a state assessment or a SAT assessment. And 3 out of the 21 students who took an AP math class scored a 4 or a 5. So you can see how there can be a concern if there's not that alignment, because students can feel a little bit disappointed, misled, which can also come back and impact them later in their academic career. As you've heard from Mr. Grogan, really Freeport Middle School has done a lot of this work and is perhaps the most far along with developing the PBE model, with their work on scoring guides, rubrics, the separations of habits of work. And again, I'll take the liberty of reading it, but what you'll see here, this left-hand column is assessments, the right is MEAs. This is from 2016-17, which was our most recent MEA scores. You can see the classroom assessments between 4s, 3.5s, and 3s. 66% of students were scoring in that 3, 3.5, or 4 level. And when you compared that across to the MEA, 67% were scoring at a 3 or a 4 on the MEA. You start to see how that work of being consistent across proficiency, separating out habits of work, allows the students to actually then replicate potentially what they're doing in classroom practices, their regular feedback, with what they're then going to experience with external or standardized assessments. Equally, when we're looking at this 1 through 4 grading system, we want to make sure that it's not detrimental to student learning. So where we were looking is, what are the grade levels that we have here in the RSU, not externally, but within our RSU, who participate in state assessments. And on this chart, it goes from grades 3 down to grade 11. It's 3 through 8 for those of you who are not familiar with it, and then 11th graders have SATs. And then we have language arts on the left and math on the right. The highest level of proficiency and largest gains relative to state averages occur at the elementary levels, where all assessments are and have been for a long time on a 1 through 4 scale. So as just a brief example, in the 3rd grade, 49% of the state average proficiency or better at the state level. In ELA, in RSU 5, 69%, so a differential of 20% higher at the RSU 5 level. And in math, 46% at the state average, 67% in RSU 5, a differential of 21%. 11th graders on the SAT, 59% at the state level on language, 63% in RSU 5 with a 4% differential, and math 35 and 39% at a 4% differential. Now, clearly there are many variables involved in that kind of information, but whilst we can't look at all those variables, I think what we can say is that when we look at students who are experiencing a 1 through 4 scale at our elementary levels, it's not detrimental to their education, certainly not compared to state standardized assessments. Bringing it back to the work of FMS for one moment, or Freeport Middle School, I mentioned where perhaps our strongest practices in the RSU exist. For PBE, you can see that the students continue to grow even while these practices are being refined. So again, I'll take the liberty of reading it. But at the top it says the MEA, 2013-14, the students for math and ELA combined were 8.5% above the state average for proficiency or better. And in 2016-17, that had almost doubled at 14% above the state average for proficiency or better. And on the NWA assessment, which is another norm data assessment that goes beyond Maine, from 2007 to 2017, the percentage of students meeting targeted growth has gone from 40% to 63%. So even while this work is going on, this evolving practices, students at Freeport Middle School have continued to demonstrate growth relative to standardized or external assessments also. That's my allotment.
So at the high school, a critical piece of data for us to always be looking at is how well are we preparing our students to apply to and enter the world of college. And also, we're often looking at our nearby schools to compare the success levels of our students to those schools. And you can see all of this data comes from the DOE National Student Data Warehouse, where you can see that the percentiles of our students who are enrolling in college anytime in the first 2 years after graduating high school. And we chose that data point 2 years because some of our students do engage in a gap year after they graduate. You can see that unfortunately our numbers have declined, and we are at 62% of our graduating class in the year 2016 the class of 2016 of those students who have enrolled in college, and that is certainly regardless of the grading system that we use. We would love to see improvement in those scores of our students who are feeling prepared and confident to apply to college. In addition, though, we feel like it's a really critical piece of data to look at is not just how many kids are we getting into college, but how many of our students are feeling well prepared enough and successful enough to remain in college. And that's the data point that we look at that's called college persistence. And so this data point is the percentage of our students who are enrolling in college or they're programming for a second year. And you can see that our numbers decline a little bit in this area, where the most recent data is that 53% of our graduating seniors are returning to college for a second year. And as Will said, there's a variety of factors that could go into that data point. But we do know that one of them is students that feel prepared and experience success in their first year of college is a major factor in returning for a second year. And we want to ensure that whatever grading practices that we're using are accurately reflecting and giving students feedback on their skills and knowledge, so that they are well prepared not only to get into college, but to persist when they get there.
Yes, go ahead.
So I know it's a lot of information.
Hold on just a second. She just has a clarifying question on her last slide.
I was wondering if I could ask Jen a question on the last slide.
Can we go back to it once we're we're done, or do you want to do it right now, Kate? You wanna
It's
do
just really quick.
it? Okay.
So 65% of the graduating seniors, or those that went to college?
No, this is, if you had a class of 100, then it would be, 65 kids out of that 100 went on to college and persisted for a second year.
So it's not that of that 65 kids, only 65% of them went back for a second year, because that would be more concerning. So if you went from 62% of kids, of your 100 kids, 62 went to college the first year, and then only 53 of those 62 went back the next year, that's different than 53% of the 62.
Correct.
So it's the first. Okay. It's of the total, not of the ones that went to college.
Right.
Perfect.
And I think what's concerning, that we're wanting to lift the aspirations of all of our kids, right? Because it's important for our kids to continue on for learning beyond, the high school diploma. So we've had a lot of feedback this year around this issue of proficiency, and we just feel like what we've really heard is that the community really aspires for some of the following things, and we really share these same concerns. We want clear pathways to a 4. We want our students to be motivated for excellence and to want to go on to college or some type of post-secondary education. We want our report cards and transcripts to be understood and aligned with college acceptance practices. We want our teachers to be using consistent practices and expectations when assessing student works. And so these are our recommendations to the board, and we're going to we'll report out on the elementary.
So the elementary schools, what we'd like to recommend is that we maintain the elementary practices that are long-standing and secure with the grading system. We refine the clear pathways to 4, continue to work to make report cards easily accessible, and ensure that there's consistent scoring across practitioners. Right.
The middle school, the recommendations that we're looking to move forward with, based on after, talking to the teachers and hearing that this is something they feel is best for student learning moving forward, the students, understand, and looking at our test scores and how they have moved. If when I was hired here 9 years ago, if I had told you this is what we're going to do with your test scores, I would have never promised that. That's some impressive test score movement that, I think is great, and we're going in the right direction, but we're always continuing to look to get better. And, for us to continue to get better, we're still going to work on, the clear pathways to a 4, helping more kids get there and clearly understand how to get there. Working with teachers on that and teachers working with kids on that. Continued refinement of our rubrics. That's something that's never done. We're always going to be looking to improve those, on the content side and the habits of work side. And then, the one part that, this isn't on the teacher side, this is really on the administrative side, is we need to make some more improvements to Power School. We've made some improvements this year with the report card for kids to be able to see. Right now we're working on customizations also into there, so when the first screen that comes up when kids and parents log in, it will have something that looks like the report card that they can click into to then also see all of their assignments. So we're definitely looking at making Power School more user-friendly moving forward as a better communication tool for student progress. This is, for those of you that haven't seen, this is the report card that comes home that has the, like the English language arts content grade with the different indicators, our standards right underneath there with the grades that are here and fill up to the top. So this is the tool that a lot of kids are using now to see how they're doing in classes, and then if they notice something that's in there, they'll go and check. My advisory, we meet, every morning, once a week. My kids pull this up, we go over this together. If there's something that's concerning, they then have to go in and click into the assignment level to show me what the assignment is, and then we talked about, all right, when are you going to talk to that teacher? What are you going to do? What's your relearning plan going to do? And the high school recommendations.
So after gathering feedback from all of our stakeholders that are involved in our high school community, we have the following recommendations. We really would like to continue with a modified implementation of a proficiency-based system. We think that it's important to continue some of the practices of proficiency, particularly ones that we feel like are working well for students. We feel like we would recommend for habits of work to remain separate. We would like to continue to utilize and revise our scoring criteria. As Ray said, those are living documents that that definitely need different levels of revision by department. But keeping the essence of scoring criteria as part of our system. We'd like to continue to utilize reassessment practices and also refine those in terms of consistency across teachers. We want to continue to monitor grade inflation. We feel like that's something that's really important for us to continue to look at that data. And we would recommend incorporating a 0 to 100% grading scale with our proficiency-based practices. When I say that, and looking at and talking to principals of more than 10 area high schools, every school is using a different method. There are many methods to use to incorporate a 0 to 100 grading scale with proficiency. And I feel that our teachers need time to look at what is going to be a system that works well for us. We want something that will be meaningful and actionable for our students and understandable for our parents and manageable for our teachers, but still incorporates the things that are working about proficiency. And finally, we would recommend that at the end of this year, that we would translate the current 9th graders' final year-end course score to a 0 to 100% score. That would be done at the very end of the school year.
So we really do believe that the proficiency-based education is the path to be on for a continuous improvement. If you decide to accept our recommendations and what Jen had just talked about for the high school, there will be a needed policy revision that you would need to recommend to the policy committee to go back and look at the IKAB, the grading system reporting student proficiency. No matter what we go with, whatever the board might decide as we enter into this discussion, we feel like whether you're using the 0 to 100 or the 1 to 4, that grading should always support deeper learning, assist in building more engaged learners, always involve the student in the learning process and the assessment process, and prepare our students for their future. Because in the end, we may not always agree, but I think we always agree that we're trying to do what's best for our kids and preparing them for their futures, whether they do go on to college or into the career force. So that concludes our long presentation. For that, I thank you all for hanging in there. The board had requested a lot of data, and I hope you're not drowning in all of the information.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for everyone who, we did ask for a lot of data, and you guys did a fantastic job collecting all of it. And while we may be swimming in data, I think it's a good problem to have. And I think it helps us all understand a little bit better all of the intricacies and stuff that we're dealing with here. So I think at this point, what we would want to do is open up the floor to questions for folks. If you do have a question or a comment, We just ask that you come up to the microphone, just let us know who you are. And there is a lot of folks here, so we're really going to try and keep people to the 3-minute time limit so that we can get through everyone as well as the board deliberation once people's comments and questions are done. So we invite you to come up and suggest if there's multiple folks who want to talk to just sort of queue up behind so we can keep everything moving.
My name is Pam Barry Santos. I have a kid in 3rd grade. My first concern is I didn't know about this till I heard word of mouth from parent to parent. Is this on? Do I have to actually talk into? Oh boy. Okay. All right. For those of us who are not singers, this is very weird. So I have, unfortunately, a whole host of extra questions and not fewer, so hopefully I can send them to you guys and we can get a response because I'm actually left with more questions. First, for the middle school, I didn't hear how that data was collected, so I'm concerned about the survey, what the actual questions were, how it was presented to them. I'd just like to know that, because to me a survey is only as good as how it was done, how the data was collected, what the questions were, what the options were given to them.
Do we want to just get, I mean, that one seems like it's a quick, should be a quick process question he could answer for you.
So the middle school survey was sent out to all of the kids at both schools. It was in a form where they filled out electronically. Most of the questions that were on there were yes or no, to kind of put them on one side or the other, whether do you support, do you understand, and things like that.
Were they anonymous?
What's that?
Were the surveys anonymous?
The surveys, we did collect their name was collected in the students, because we did ask for some teacher feedback too, that we had within there. And so yeah, on the student side, there were student names.
Okay. I'm trying to pick out the top ones for my 3 minutes here. This is kind of budget related. How much of the budget is going towards proficiency-based education? And I still haven't heard about any academic research about proficiency-based education. We keep talking about it as though it's generally accepted that this is the way forward and this is the best way. I can't find any academic research on it. I find it from Great Schools Partnership, but they make money on it. So I'm looking for independent sources that tell us proficiency-based education is the way to go. For the 1 through 4, I got a whole bunch of questions. Basically, I'm concerned about transcripts. My kid is in 3rd grade. I'm already worried about it. When I go to look online and when I read about what colleges think, there are 3,000 plus 4-year college institutions in this country alone. If my kid doesn't want to go to a school in New England, doesn't want to go to a school in Maine, how do I assume that they're going to understand what that means? If you've got kids in other parts of the country that are getting greater than a 4.0 GPA because they've got AP classes, if we start presenting a 3.5 and saying, hey, it's great, Brown has 30,000 applications. I keep hearing Brown being brought up. They have 30,000 applicants a year. If my kid has a 3 or a 3.5 and we think that's dandy, maybe Brown doesn't. And that's my concern going forward. Big question, the law. It might change. Are we changing anything if the law changes? There are 3 bills in the State House right now that just had a hearing on Monday. They're having a workshop on Friday. What happens if they get rid of this? The law is only about a proficiency-based diploma. Has nothing to do with the education system. It's specifically about the diploma. a lot of the work that teachers are doing are things that might have been under the main learning results or whatever that was called, that was passed in the late 90s and then again changed in 2007. My concern is if the state of Maine decides we aren't doing a proficiency-based diploma, what's our move here? Are we still doing 1 through 4 and saying we've got a proficiency-based diploma? Are we going to shuffle back and forth, or are we going to try to be consistent? And then I'll save the rest for email and let other people talk because I got pages. Thanks.
So we do want to...
Just one second. She's got a quick answer for, well, at least one.
Okay, so I do have a couple of quick answers because I think it's important for people to hear. There was, I think your question was around what are we kind of spending in the budget around proficiency. For next year, we have a contract with Great Schools Partnership for $15,000. And then there had been a question emailed about Power School, and we do spend about $18,000 on the Power School itself for the contract. For PD, we have $4,400.
Professional development, PD.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Professional development, $4,400. And then the company that's been working with us to make a report card that's more accessible and more easily understood, we have a contract for $3,400. There was a question about if proficiency went away, would we get rid of all of that Power School money? We would not. Power School does a lot of other things other than track the standards. So it tracks attendance, it tracks discipline, many other. It really is our student information system. So for districts that don't have Power School, most of them have something called Infinite Campus, which is equally about as expensive. We also have money. We get Title II, $63,000. That goes for professional development, and then overall in next year's budget we have about $115,000 budgeted for professional development. And whether we're doing 0 to 100 or 1 to 4, all of our practices are aligned to all of our programs, are aligned to standards-based teaching and learning, so that would still be there. But those are the numbers that we have in next year's budget. The law, you're right, there are 3 bills out there. We were doing proficiency-based teaching and learning in RSU 5 before there was any law. So the original law around the proficiency-based diploma went into effect in 2012. So we see our path continuing no matter what happens with the statute.
Good evening. My name is Betsy Peters. I live at 24 Cortland Road. I have 2 boys who are learning in the RSU. I'm also a former school board member, so you have my heartfelt gratitude, as do all of you guys. It was a great presentation tonight. The things I learned during my tenure shifted the focus of my career to a focus on education and the future of work. So over the past 10 years, I have watched our system of education wrestle with the realities of the 4th Industrial Revolution. We've moved from steam to electricity to computers and connectivity, and now we're in the middle of systems combining that are biological, physical, and digital that will change our world forever within the next 15 or 20 years. So education just has to change. It's just the reality. We're all changing. So if we don't change the way we teach to favor students being their own advocates and understanding what's required of them in a very clear way, the way competency-based education, the promise of competency-based education sets it out, we're going to be behind the 8 ball in a rapidly changing world. We're not alone in this regard. So back to the last question, there are 6 million students in the United States system who are in a competency-based situation. There's a myth going around that Maine is one of the primary drivers. We are an innovator, we're a small state. Angus King put us on an innovator trajectory.
There's only one state in the nation that is not experiencing competency-based education. There are 10 who are advanced in their adoption and implementation. There are 13 that are developing, 27 emerging. This is a national trend, not a Maine trend. As further evidence, I'm married to a lawyer, sorry. February's, this is the AASA, so the American Association of School Administrators trade publication in February. 4 out of 6 articles are dedicated to proficiency-based education. This is a national publication. So it's not just Maine, it's not just us. Now, I spend a lot of time talking to colleges and to people in the workforce, and this is a trend that they appreciate. So there are concerns about colleges, and there are concerns about the measuring sticks. This is very important for us to get right. And as you can tell from the surveys and the concerns, we're not there, and we still have very much hard work to do. But I can tell you that this is the New England Board of Higher Education, and they have said explicitly that all admissions leaders overwhelmingly agree that students applying from proficiency-based educational systems will experience no disadvantage in the evaluation and admissions processes. That is particularly true with the competitive colleges. So just think about Brown for a minute. Yeah, 30,000 people are applying every year to Brown. They come from China, they come from Singapore, they come from homeschooling. There is absolutely no measurement that is equal across all these education systems that the very selective colleges are getting every time. They're pros at this. They have always been pros at evaluating who belongs, who fits, and who doesn't. Now, the state schools in far afield states, some of the ones that are in the emerging category, we should worry about that and we should do our homework on it. So, you know, I think about the Knightons, my son's best friends, who are thinking about school in Utah. And Utah is on here as a developing state. But how far are they developing? Those are questions we should be really focused on, not should we be doing proficiency or not. So I have one question for you before I finish this up. Last piece. We didn't, for whatever reason, we choose not to put RSU 2 in our cohort. That's Monmouth and a number of others, Kennebec. RSU 2 has graduated 2 graduating classes of proficiency-based diplomas. And Bill Zuma, their superintendent, was up in Augusta on Monday, and he reported that 85% of their kids went to college these last 2 years, and 85% of them got their first choices. And their lists weren't that different than what's up there. I mean, Smith is on here, Williams is on here, Amherst is on here. So we've got people up the road who are already doing this. So I'm not saying that anyone who is adopting this is perfect. It takes 2 or 3 years to decide to adopt from a budgetary standpoint, from a board standpoint, from a system standpoint, and then it can take up to 7 to fully implement. So we're just feeling implementation problems is what it sounds like to me as I listen to the feedback from the teachers and the parents. So my question that I'm most curious about the data that was presented tonight is what is the disparity between the respondents in the high school and the respondents in the middle school? Why is there 37% responding in the high school and 75 or whatever, you know, what's going on in terms of getting people to give us feedback? Because as the public, we need it.
Well, that's an easy question. You know, Charlie and I have spoken about how do we capture the voices of all of our faculty members, and we have not figured out a system right now to do that. I think that there's people who have a clear opinion and might not be sharing it. I think there are people who aren't totally sure because they maybe have one toe in it. They don't have 2 feet right in it. But I think regardless, we need to do a better job of fostering an environment where everybody feels like we could get 100% of people to respond. I think a factor potentially that I don't want to sound as an excuse is that our teachers are really busy. They are working so incredibly hard right now. We have a lot on our plate, and it could be that people needed more time to answer that. But I think it's certainly something that we are wrestling with, of how do we make sure everyone's heard, and not that we want to swing the voices in one way or the other. We just want to hear them all.
My name's Alan Tracy. I have 3 kids in the RSU, and I have some prepared comments that I'd like to share. But I guess to comment on the presentations, I really appreciate it. I thought they were great. I appreciate the asks that clearly have gone out from the board to collect the data. This is helpful tonight. As someone who's been kind of cranking on this for a while, this is definitely progress, and this is definitely a step forward. A couple comments on what was presented tonight. A lot of it couldn't be seen from a lot of people sitting in certain areas, but nonetheless, it was really good. It was helpful. I think we got the gist. I think there's a lot of questions about the data, the collection, things like that. That's not for me to really core into. I do want to make a point that in the presentations and even some of the comments, I feel like there's this overarching continued, not confusion, because I know everyone gets that proficiency education is not the grading. I mean, we're here doing a workshop on the grading, is my understanding, after significant community requests for it. And I want to separate those two things. I think that's really important, particularly because so much of the in favor of narrative tonight was connected to test scores and proficiency education, and look what we're doing. And you know, that is or isn't, and we can all dissect that another time, but it's not the grading system. The grading system has significant deficiencies. They are glaring deficiencies. And those are kind of the comments that I want to focus on. So if you don't mind, I'd just like to get through some of this. I've given it some thought. And again, I'm glad that the board has taken this up. I appreciate it. I would really like to see some more substantive discussion from the board. I was a little disappointed that there were not questions to and from the presenters from the board. I hope we see that. Well, our family's experience with the 1 through 4 grading model and proficiency over 6 years has been frustration and confusion. And I made this clear to the board. I'm going to just say it again. We see very little schoolwork come home. We see very little evaluated work come home. And the grades we see on report cards have very little meaning to us, to my wife and I. They also frustrate our children. We have 2 in the middle school and 1 in 3rd grade. When we ask teachers about how our kids can achieve the highest grades, their responses range from "I don't give 4s" to vague and subjective goals like going above and beyond to get a 4, or even worse, which is probably the most common comment we hear, which is how happy we should be that they're getting a 3, the proficiency 3, as I've started to call it. How satisfied and happy we should be with that, which we are not. We are not as a family. Our children are not academically gifted, certainly not in the parlance of how the school defines it and gives special services. My kids are hard workers. They don't get it from me, they get it from my wife. But nonetheless, they are hard workers. They are the kids who I feel are most deprived in this system. They put significant effort into their schoolwork. It's what we expect as parents, and the grades are one way that we have as parents to evaluate how hard they are working. And we absolutely use grades to look at that. They often end up with a 3, which seems to be a very common grade given to many different levels. I thought the high school teacher presented it. I can't even remember how she described it, but it was perfect. The 3 is like this squishy, huge category, which we definitely see, and I don't think there's any question that that's the case in proficiency grading or standards grading, however we want to call it. And this isn't just a subjective or a casual observation. It's very quantifiable. I recently shared with you, the board, an email I had sent about most recent semester grades that had been received by one of my daughters. She'd gotten a 3.5 under underlying standards in a English language grade. She had gotten a 3.5, a 3.5, a 3, and a 3. Her core grade was a 3. She said to me, and I agree, somebody could get a 3, a 3, a 3, and a 2.5, and they get the same 3. It's absolutely, there's no question that that's happening. The data will prove it. I've asked you, the board, to go and get the data from the middle school. I think it would be shocking if we all saw the data over the last 3 years of how clustered the grading is. That's my point. I think that's the deficiency in the grading. And I think that really diminishes incentive. I want her to strive for the grade. That's what I expect. I think that's one of the most fundamental skills that we're getting in school, is how to be the best that we can be wherever we happen to be. And the desire is an important part of that, how to get the most out of yourselves. A grading system should reflect this and teach this, and ours does not. The grades matter to our family and to most everyone else. I do not feel the need to quantify this statement, and I do not apologize for it. It is how we measure our children's effort, ability, and achievement. It is how generations of parents, teachers, and institutions have measured student achievement. Our grading system, as it is, does not provide an accurate measure of student achievement. It's subjective, vague, inaccurate, and inequitable. But worst of all, it can have the effect over time of diminishing achievement. I'm seeing that in my own family. There's no question, and that's the most upsetting. I just want to make one other point. Some of the data that was presented tonight and has been presented to me also.
I'm just going to tell you, Alan, you're at about 5.5 minutes.
I'm out. This is the last thing. But the point about the NWEA scores, they're presented to us tonight, and they've been presented to me. 40% 10 years ago, 63% today, okay? Quantifiable numbers. Isn't that ironic to be presenting us on this discussion tonight that we're having about 1 through 4 grading, about being proud, about being rightfully proud? Wouldn't it be a shame if we lump those all? You know, for me, I look at 40% and 63%, and I think, oh, that looks like a 3. That's a solid 3. It diminishes, and I'm not being a wise guy, but think about it. It really is ironic to be talking about that. But what does that do? It diminishes the achievement that our teachers, our staff, our schools have achieved. It lumps it all in. I mean, that's not a out of left field comparison. Thank you. Thank you for your work, everyone.
My name is Brian Knighton. I'm a Freeport resident. Can everybody hear me? I'd just like to echo, we did not collaborate, but I could not agree more with the words that were just spoken. I will not take 5 minutes. I'll just be brief, probably 30 seconds. I have 4 children, 3 of which applied to college. 2 are in and 1 just got accepted. As a father, I have worked with my children in the college application. We do not apply to New England schools. We apply to schools that are outside of this area. And I look at this, the grading system, as our educational currency that we need to be able to communicate in a way that these schools understand. For example, the B+ in Freeport is viewed as an A- in most of the rest of the country. So when the school asks, what is your child's grade? And I say it's a B+, in fact, it's really an A-. And we ran into this problem with one of the largest private universities, very competitive school in the country. Thank goodness Freeport schools had a 100-point scale. Because without that, they said, we don't know what to do with what your school calls this number. And I said, well, we have a 100-point scale. Well, what did your child get in a 100-point scale? Well, 93. We call that an A. I'm grateful that Freeport had the 100-point scale until, with my profession, I look at a lot of data. I can't make decisions with what I do based off of local surveys, based off of personal preferences. They have to be based off of national standards. Either it works or it doesn't. Either the outcomes work or they don't. Until it becomes a national standard, I can't risk having my child be part of an educational experiment and then try to take this number and communicate it and translate it to a college that doesn't know what to do with this. I need the 100-point scale to communicate to colleges that my children are applying to. Thank you.
Thank you.
Carrie Stump. I'm here from Freeport. 2 children in high school. Again, I just want to reiterate the difference between the proficiency-based grading versus the proficiency-based standards. I think, as the last 2 people have mentioned, it's not the standards that I have an issue with personally. It's the grading that is the concern, just like, again, everyone is stating. the rubrics and all the work the teachers have put into that to clarify what is necessary to receive the grades has been tremendously important to my kids in knowing where they need to improve and so forth. But does that need to be on a 1 to 4 scale? I don't believe so. I believe that the grading is definitely the issue. The assessments, being able to reassess, I see pros and cons with that. The real world does not let you redo your work all the time, resubmit things and so forth, but as from a learning standpoint, yes, where do you draw that line? Where does learning stop and the real world start to take over? So I do have, that's grade for me. The one question I have is we saw a list of the schools, the colleges, for proficiency-based standards or gradings that was up here. And there was school A, B, and C, and I think we were school B. We were A, sorry. We were A, but that's not our 9th grade class. Our 9th grade class hasn't been accepted to any colleges. Nobody has seen their transcripts. There might be 11 colleges, you know, very distinguished colleges that were on there, but when my child gets to graduation, I'm afraid that we're gonna see a couple state schools based on what the transcripts look like if we don't make this change. I think creating one more grading scale for a college to have to figure out during the admissions process is just too much. We already have a good grading standard and we need to continue with the 0 to 100 unless this can actually at some point be improved upon. So that's all I have.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kelly Fitzrandolph. I'm the mother of a 4th grader at Mass Landing School and a 6th grade teacher at Freeport Middle. So I just want to say a couple things. I will have to say we have been working very hard at making things more clear for students to understand how they can meet a 3, 5, and a 4. And I will say on a positive note, I have more kids working this year to reach a higher standard. I've had kids in the past say, yeah, 2.5, that's great. B, same thing, you know. It's not really the number or the grade. What I find this year is I have more kids not looking at the numbers and trying to understand more and deeper content. So I feel like what we're doing is making a difference. It's not the number that's important to the kids, it's what they need to understand. So I think really that's what we need to focus on. And yeah, we have a 1 through 4 grading system, and I think it's really starting to work. So that's pretty much what I'm going to say.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Faith Gonring, and my daughter's in middle school. And my daughter is in middle school. My name is Faith Gonring, and I wasn't prepared to talk tonight, so I'll be short, and Alan can have most of my 3 minutes. So my questions are about how the numbers, you know, I had the same situation. My daughter had a couple of 3s, a couple of 3.5s. Mathematically, that should came out closer to a 3.5, but she got a 3. So I don't know how that works. And I also have big concerns about college. I have a friend who recently just got her master's, and she went to a college for her bachelor's where they just had a pass-fail system. And the college didn't know how to equate that, so they gave her, because she passed her classes, the college gave her a 2 in all those past classes, because they didn't know how to mathematically make that work into a GPA. So she came out, she started college on probation because of that. So my questions are about how colleges are going to interpret it. I know that we'll get there eventually, but I don't want my daughter to be, you know, the pawn in the research. So she's not that far away. She's in 8th grade right now. She's going to be the 2nd graduating class, so I'm not sure how things are going to get worked out by the time she graduates.
Do we have an answer on the rounding question? So if you have a 3.26, is that a 3.5 in the content grade, or is that a 3?
I'm going to have Ray answer that. He's our Power School guru.
So the two middle schools, we have it where the kids can get 3, 3.5, and 4. And if they have a 3.26, yes, it should round up. There were a couple, issues. I think there were 3 that were brought to my attention when we handed out this last report card, that there were a kid that had 2 3s and 2 3.5s. 3.25 should round up to a 4. We contacted Power School. They went in and checked off something in the teacher's grade book, and the kid's grade went to what it was supposed to round to. So we had, I think there was 3 issues brought to my attention that they felt it didn't round correct, and we contacted Power School and it did. But yeah, so anything above a 3.25 goes up, anything below goes down.
And 3.25 goes up? 3.25
goes up.
Or up?
That's the cut. So 3.24 or lower.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hello, my name is Lois Beardsley. I have 7th grader. I live in Pownell. And I have concerns about the standards the grading system, as opposed to the learning system, that lead me to believe it's not in the best interest of our children, especially those in the middle school and the high school. The 3 major problems that I see are that the system, I'm not convinced it is able to distinguish between the kids that are in a very broad number, say a 3, and that this poses a disadvantage to kids in the college application process. The second concern I have is that the 1 to 4 grading system undermines motivation. Kids are not encouraged to work to improve if they've fallen into the category of 3, because just the terminology meets expectations. What more is there? When I encouraged my son to work a little harder on a subject, he said, meets expectations, with a shrug. What else can I do? Then about a month ago, he said, well, if in a 1 to 4 grading system, the 3 meets expectations, and then a 3.5 or 4 exceeds expectations, why would the school expect me to be less than exceptional, but just average? Do they want everyone to be just average? Stop there. And even up until a short time ago, some teachers were saying that one cannot achieve a 4. So I have a bright boy, but if he meets expectations and there's no incentive, then he's going to apply his efforts to his social life instead of his academic life. So that's a worry of mine, and I see that he usually loves learning. He loves many subjects, but that I don't see that he's got the incentive to keep going and following those interests. My third concern is that the system's number assessment is not clear to students or parents. It's been a long time, and there's still confusion. It's still not clear. The numbers include such a broad range of achievement in the content, and also there's a number assigned to HOW, habits of work, including determination, etc. When we ask to what degree or to what level did the student understand this material or content, the words degree and level indicate a quantitative assessment. This needs to be clear and concise. A 0 to 100 grading system provides that. When we ask, what are the students' habits of work, these are qualities, and qualities are not conducive to assessment by numbers. A thoughtful commentary by a teacher at the end of a trimester is much more helpful in terms of determination and attitude and that kind of thing. It's more meaningful than a number applied to something that's subjective. So it's the manner of assessment within this system, as directed by the state, as I understand it, is very loosely defined. So we, as a community, and represented by our Board of Education, have the ability to design the manner of assessment to be concise and informative to students and parents. A large part of the community are calling for a review of the current problematic system. So we need to stop using the current problematic system until an assessment is completed by the Board of Education as to its effectiveness. So that's what I, as a parent, would ask that the board do. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm John Morris. I'm from Pownell. I have 3 boys in the school system. I appreciate all the work that's been done here, and I think I share some of the sentiments about the grading, but that's not what I wanted to stop and just have my say about. I'm really troubled by the disparity in the responses that the CEA had and that the administration had, and I'm more troubled by the lack of support that the teachers have given the implementation of PBE. I think it really speaks to a problem of culture in the school. And I think it's really, I don't even know the word to describe how, I'm a school teacher myself, how you can almost feel the tension just in bar graphs and circle graphs and pie graphs. I hope that comes out through these discussions about how important it is to listen to teachers, the people who actually have to do the work, who are actually doing their best for the students and the parents. I think Mr. Ogilvy's report was very insightful, so thank you.
Thanks, John.
Hi, can everyone hear me okay? All right, my name is Heather Aguirre, and I have a son at the middle school. And I wasn't planning on speaking tonight, but I am. So I want to say that I do not have a PowerSchool account, so I was a little shocked to find out how much money is spent on it. But that's because, to a certain extent, and certainly partly because of this grading system, my son's grades are really not that important to me, at least at the middle school level, because what is really important to me, and I think Lois echoed some of this as well, is the relationship that he has with his teachers and the experience that he's having in the classroom and what he's getting from his teachers, what they're able to teach him. And I have to say a big shout out to all the middle school teachers. They're fantastic. Like to me, like that is the essence of what is important at school, is if you have happy teachers and teachers that are able to teach well and connect with the students, to a certain extent, just dividing the students into 4 not totally random, but 4 categories is a little bit meaningless to me personally. However, my son is also like kind of the polar opposite of Alan Tracy's daughters, in that he's the type of kid that, yeah, if he gets a 3, well, that's not the big a deal. He's not going to flip out. He's not going to feel at all, even if he could have gotten a 4 easily, or he's like, well, that's okay, no big deal. So I do feel that this particular proficiency-based grading is a little bit of giving that impression that, yeah, okay is good enough. You don't need, for kids that don't have that type A personality. And again, I don't think it's a big deal at the middle school level or the elementary level, because I think it's more about those connections they have with their teachers and their interactions at school, and that's all healthy and good. However, to me, it's a no-brainer, and I'm glad the high school teachers want this, because I do feel at the high school level that 1 to 4 grading system it doesn't differentiate enough. I mean, it's not, you need a more nuanced grading system at that level, especially for college admissions. To me, you know, that's just common sense. It's not a grading system that allows you to learn anything, which is why I don't have a PowerSchool account. It seems, at least to a parent, it doesn't interpret to me at all. I find it completely meaningless. So I'm not a college, but thanks.
Thank you.
My name is Melissa Schultz. I'm from Pownell. I've got 3 kids. My oldest is 7th grade, but we've chosen to homeschool him this year. I've spoken before. It's not a new story. I have a couple of random thoughts that I'm going to try and string together, just some thoughts that I've had over the past couple weeks and from this presentation tonight, which, by the way, was phenomenal. You guys definitely did your research, and I totally appreciate that. My first thought is, at my job, I'm sure I'm not the only one that gets a year-end review. We go in and we sit with our manager, and we have to reach these. We have a rubric, just like what's used in the school, and we have to either exceed expectations, satisfactory, or needs reinforcement, or whatever, and we're awarded letters that represent those categories. And as we go through those categories, they're explained, and we talk about how we can achieve or do a little bit better. It's very clear, it's very useful. I find total value in it. And then at the end of the conversation, it always ends with, okay, what does that equate into money? Because that is what speaks to me. I imagine it's the same with grades. The 1 through 4 is great, or if we wanted to use ABC or whatever, or XYZ or whatever, all that's great. The rubrics are great, but at the end of the day, what does that equate to in a 0 to 100 scale is kind of my thought on that. I see the value. I know there's been a lot of work from the Peters and from lots of other people as far as putting effort into developing this education. I really truly see value. I don't think there's anything wrong with the education system that we're using. It's the grading part. And if it's going to take us 7 years to get to a part that is universal and a common currency throughout the United States, that's 7 years of graduating classes that are going to be suffering and having to work through those pains of growing. And I don't think that's fair to ask that of them, to go through it, because they barely understand it themselves. And so I think that's not fair to ask. I appreciate the high school. Are you the principal? Yeah, I appreciate that she said, sorry, I thought you were. I appreciate that she recommended that we go back to the 0 to 100 scale, and I really appreciate that if that would continue until we get this all worked out. If it takes 7 years, then it takes 7 years. But I think for the high school, it's most important. I would like to see it in the middle school personally, because I've got more kids coming up, and it makes homeschooling a better option for me, but it really is hard. I would rather send them to school, but if it's confusing for them to go to school and not understand the system, then I will homeschool them. But it would be really great if we could get it in the high school and keep it there until all the kinks are worked out. My other thought, and I think I emailed some or all of you, is that we already have a system in place. With the 0 to 100 scale that converts to ABC, that converts to a GPA between 0 and 4, why are we recreating the wheel? Why can't we just use that same system that we already have in place that equates a 100 equals to a 4.0 in a GPA? Why are we recreating that? Why are we saying 100 is now a 3 when we've already got it figured out and it's already kind of working, and it sort of melds the two grading systems already? Can someone answer that? Because I'm not a teacher. I don't understand why that's so hard. Does anybody have a comment about that?
I'm going to let Jen answer because they're living in the two worlds. So I think she's probably best equipped to answer that.
We're just flipping Jen all the hard ones tonight.
It's okay. So when we have used a 4.0 GPA scale that equates in the way that you're describing it, or that you're asking about, that's the average of multiple grades that are coming together and then averaging out onto a scale, at a very nuanced level, where you can have a 3.86, you can have a 3.23. That's actually not a practice that we use at the high school. We use as the gentleman who spoke said, Dr. Knighton, I think, said that we use the 0 to 100 when we're reporting to colleges. And so it's slightly different than when you are giving students targeted feedback on one particular skill, where on a rubric we wouldn't be able to say I believe that you've scored a 3.86 in this particular area, where we're really looking at the letters and, the descriptors that are underneath each one of the categories. You can, as I explained, other schools are using conversion charts where they have taken 1 to a 4 and they are turning it into a 0 to 100 scale. What's interesting about that is so far, Charlie and I have seen about 25 different scales from different schools. So the way that they are mathematically converting it, because it's not a simple conversion in terms of assessments and assignments, that's where it gets quite complicated. So it's not a clear answer that I just gave you, but it is rather complex. In a traditional system, there hasn't been a time where you're using GPA at a task level, on an assignment level. It's taking all of the different classes together and averaging those skills to then come out on that scale.
Right, it's usually done like at the end, or it's done like at the end of each semester, isn't it? I mean, it's not per test that you take. I guess I'm wondering is, if you look at the end of the semester and you have those grades, why isn't it that point, or at the end of the year, whenever it's normally done, why can't it still be that way?
Well, so again, we don't use that system at Freeport High School. So but there certainly are schools that do that. Some will wait until the end of the year. I've worked in 3 other high schools, and 2 of the 3 waited until the end of the year to calculate any GPA whatsoever, and 1 did it at the semester mark.
Okay, and so Freeport doesn't use any GPA ever?
We don't. We use a 0 to 100.
Okay.
Mm.
I guess that's it.
Thank you. All right. We're good? Okay, thank you. So I guess at this point we'll open it up to board members. If you guys have comments or questions about the presentation, or Kate.
I'm going to ask this question because it goes into what Jen was just talking about. But I have other questions. But I'll wait. We can go one at a time. Okay, so I want to know, because this is not computing in my head, how you can use 0 to 100 for performance-based education.
I think both Ray and Jen could probably answer that, because I know the middle school did a dual system for 2 years.
So, as I said, what we've been looking at recently, and we had seen this in the past, and actually in 2015 when we first started implementing it with our 9th graders, we had a conversion scale. What's difficult about the conversion scale is, as I said, each school has defined the conversion slightly differently. So where an 85 could be a 3.5 in one school, an 86 could be at another school, an 87 could be at another school, and that's one of the challenges. I think the way that you can do it is, and the way that I've seen other schools doing it, is that you have a consistent conversion scale that you use. So you would use that conversion scale school-wide. Some are waiting to do the conversion at the standard level, so they would still be scoring using scoring criteria and rubrics, and 1 to 4 using the 0.5 scale, and then waiting until there's multiple assignments and translating that to a score. Some schools are waiting until all of the standards have been assessed, putting them all together, coming out with numbers like we are doing right now, like a 3.71, and then there is a full scale where that equates to another grade. I would say I have not seen examples in as many schools where they are using the 0 to 100 at the top of an actual scoring criteria. There are some that do that, but again, that gets into the argument of that's pretty nuanced in terms of consistency from teacher to teacher. If there was a range of a number that equated to a 4, you could have some significant discrepancy from one teacher to another of when you're talking about it, what that number actually stands for. But But I think there are possibilities to do that. Calibration between teachers, again, I think you can get consistency in different ways. That would be the key to that. Ray's not going to answer that one. No.
I mean, I would speak more from a teacher's perspective. When I was a teacher, when proficiency was coming in, 15 years ago or so, and if I had an English assignment that had 3 different indicators scored on it, so that's 3 times 4 is 12 possible points, and I would say 12 points is 100, 11 is a 95, 10 is, so if they got 4 on this indicator, 3 on this indicator, 4 on this indicator, they've earned 11 points. That translates into a 95, and that's what a lot of Freeport middle school teachers did 4 or 5 years ago with rubrics, and then translated them back out. And then when we switched to kind of the dual currency, where teachers scored in their grade book on a 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it produced something in PowerSchool that was A, B, C, D, that's when we got the most feedback about anything, is that the kids, teachers, and parents had a hard time understanding the dual currency. With that, Ben, who sits in here, he lived that, and he was one of the kids that was leading the feedback on let us live in one world with that. And where I was teaching, I was really living in one world. I was doing the rubrics, but I was scoring it out, because they would see at the top of the assignment, if you have 11 points, you get a 95. So it would go into PowerSchool. I was Infinite Campus at the time as a 95, and everything was recorded on a 1 to 100 scale. Does that make sense, Kate?
So that makes absolute sense, but what I'm nervous about is how, if you're putting in PowerSchool the 95, the 1 through 4 is in no way reported to the parents. Is that correct? Or does you see it when the assessment comes home?
So what Greeley Middle School has right now is they put 90. If they put a 98 or higher in the grade book, it'll trickle down to the standards that are attached and put a E next to those standards. If they put in a 93 maybe, or whatever it is, that will trickle into an M in there.
I'd say that there are still some schools that are also using dual reporting systems. We are crystal clear at the high school about feedback about not wanting to do that. And so where one system would track those proficiency scores, and then the other system would then have that converted score. And our teachers were doing that in 2015, and that takes an exorbitant amount of time to do dual entry like that. And then I think, in addition to what Ray was saying, there are some schools that when I was talking to other principals, where they have established a system that when they are entering a 3.5 into the not PowerSchool, they were using a different system. When they were entering it into their system, it was automatically converting it. They had mathematically done their own conversion scale, and then it entered it. So teachers were still entering a 2.5, a 3.5, and the computer was doing the conversion to the 0 to 100. So that's a different way that some schools are doing it.
Don't go far, I'm sure, Jen.
Yeah, you can sit down. I mean, you can sit down or stand up. I don't know. Just on this topic of the 1 to 3. So I'm imagining a scenario where